She stood in the middle of the party and publicly declared, "My husband is not the biological father of my child." But what left me frozen was my husband's reaction that followed. "Stay." Because the truth behind it is more brutal than you think. The tiny baby pants slipped from my trembling fingers and landed soundlessly on the pink and blue tablecloth like a white flag of surrender. 30 pairs of eyes, my mother's, my friends', my neighbors', watched my world collapse in a single instant. The scent of lavender tea and expensive buttercream frosting suddenly became overpowering, suffocating me, blending with the sharp, terrified smell of sweat seeping through my maternity dress. "The baby isn't Brandon's," Natalie said each word clearly in the middle of the party. Around us were torn wrapping paper and congratulation cards that now felt like a cruel joke. My 8 months pregnant body, suddenly like a prison, trapping me on this chair, in this moment, in this humiliation. Natalie. It was Natalie who had helped me plan this party for months. Natalie who had called me every Sunday to talk about color palettes and menus. Natalie who had held my hair back when I was sick during lunch dates. And now it was Natalie holding a clipboard with a list of gift givers. Her perfectly manicured nails painted the exact coral shade I had chosen for my bridesmaid dresses 3 years ago. "This is not the time for jokes, Natalie." I turned to look at my husband. Then he stood up, straightened his silk tie, the burgundy one I had bought him for our anniversary, and walked straight over to my cousin, Natalie. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together with a familiarity that made my stomach churn, a practiced ease that hinted at countless hand-holdings I had never witnessed. "Let's go," Brandon announced to the whole room, his voice even, cold, and completely stripped of the warmth I had known for 5 years. His tone was exactly the same as when he fired incompetent employees from the company. Cold, indifferent, final. "The show is over." Not a single explanation. My 8 months pregnant belly felt like it was crushing my lungs, each milliliter of air painfully squeezed out. The baby kicked hard, a sharp, unmistakable blow to my ribs that shot straight into my spine, as if she knew, as if she could feel my heart shattering into 1,000 pieces right there in my mother-in-law's spotless living room with its cream-colored carpets and family photos that would now need to be edited, rearranged, reconsidered to erase me from their lives. "Brandon!" My voice came out like a wet, broken whisper, barely audible amid the sudden ringing in my ears. "What are you doing?" "Don't." He lifted his other hand without even looking at me, still facing the door, already gone in his mind. "Don't, Hannah. We both knew this was going to happen." Did we? Did we both know? Because just last night, I had been lying beside him, his hand resting on my belly, feeling our daughter's kicks, planning how we would rearrange the nursery this weekend. This morning, I had made his favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with pure maple syrup, and he had kissed my forehead and told me I looked beautiful. Was there any part of those moments that warned me this was coming? Natalie, beautiful Natalie, childless, 25 years old, with a toned body from yoga, a trust fund, and an Instagram feed full of artisan coffee and inspirational quotes, tightened her grip on his hand. She looked at me, and her expression was not quite pity, not quite triumph. Worse than that, it was relief. The relief of someone who had been holding her breath and could finally exhale, someone who had lived a lie and was now free to live her truth, no matter who drowned in the process. "I'm sorry, Hannah," she said, "but we love each other. We've been in love for months. That part is real, and I have to stand up for Brandon." The room grew so quiet I could hear the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner. Tick, tock, tick, tock, counting down every second of my humiliation. 30 women who had come to celebrate the upcoming birth of my first child now sat frozen, teacups paused midair, napkins clenched in pale hands, watching my husband walk out in the middle of my own baby shower. Some looked horrified, others looked entertained. Mrs. Alvarez next door had already reached for her phone, probably typing up the group message that would spread through our small town like wildfire. But finally, My mother-in-law, Evelyn, broke the silence. "Well," she said, setting her porcelain teacup down with a sharp clink, deliberately loud like the crack of a gunshot. She smoothed the fabric of her designer dress, not looking at her son, but straight at me, with eyes that had always been cold and were now hollow. "I suppose this finally explains why the baby never really looked like our family in the ultrasound photos. Those features, rather ordinary." Her cruel voice struck me like a slap from the sky, as if she had reached across the room and physically hit me. This was the woman who had pretended to love me for 3 years, who had hugged me at Christmas and called me daughter, who had helped me pick out the buttercup yellow paint for the nursery just last week. Standing at the paint counter at Home Depot, laughing about which shade would yellow the least. Now sitting there with open satisfaction, at the corners of her mouth and in the set of her shoulders. "Evelyn!" Sophie, my best friend, shouted from across the room as she shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a shrill screech like nails on a chalkboard. "Are you serious right now? You're really going to sit there and—" "Oh, I'm quite serious," Evelyn replied, her thin lips curving into a smile that was not quite a smile and very clearly smug. I realized then she was a woman who had been waiting for this moment. She had never accepted me. I didn't come from a good family. I had no proper pedigree. I didn't belong in her country club world of tennis lessons and charity galas. I never trusted her. Brandon deserved something better than a little gold digger who probably got pregnant on purpose to trap him into marriage. "Well, sweetheart, that didn't quite work out, did it?" The words sliced into the weak points of my armor and slipped in with surgical precision. Gold digger, trap. Got pregnant on purpose. I tried to stand, my heavily pregnant body slow and uncooperative, my center of gravity shifting in ways I was still learning to manage, but my legs couldn't hold me. They trembled violently, shaking as if I were standing on a fault line during an earthquake. The room spun. The pastel balloons seemed to close in on me, their cheerful colors now mocking me. "Hannah, breathe." Sophie suddenly dropped to her knees beside me, her hand warm and steady on my back, her voice low and urgent. "Come on, honey, breathe. Don't listen to her. Don't listen to any of them." But it was too late. The damage was spreading like a viral toxin through the room, contaminating everything it touched. I could see it on their faces. The shift from shock to calculation, suspicion creeping in, judgment taking shape. They were rewriting history in real time, revising their memories of me to fit this new story. Had I been too eager to marry Brandon? Had I pushed for the pregnancy? They were asking themselves these questions, and I could see the answers they were choosing reflected in their eyes. The whispered conversations would begin the second the front door closed behind me. I could almost hear them already. "Well, now that you mention it, she did seem a little desperate. I always thought there was something off about her. Poor Brandon, trapped by a pregnancy." My Aunt Linda, Natalie's mother, stood up and brushed invisible crumbs from her silk dress. She couldn't bring herself to look at me. She had known. Oh God, she had known all along and said nothing. "Well, I suppose we should go," she murmured to the room, her voice tight. "Such a shame. Natalie, sweetheart, we'll talk later." Such a shame. My marriage collapsing in front of everyone I loved was unfortunate, like a picnic ruined by rain or a flat tire on the way to work. One by one, they began to leave. Some offered awkward apologies, eyes glued to the floor, shoulders hunched as if trying to shrink themselves, to be less complicit. "I'm so sorry, Hannah. This is terrible. Take care." Others slipped out in silence, eager to get to their cars and start the group chats, to be the first to spread the news to those who hadn't witnessed it firsthand. Within 20 minutes, the only ones left were Sophie, my sister Kelsey, my mother sitting blankly on the couch, and me sitting in the middle of unopened boxes and shattered dreams. The gifts were still there: a breast pump, a diaper genie, a musical wind chime with dancing elephants, all the tools for a life that no longer existed. Honey, Kelsey said softly, fear threading through her voice in a way I had never heard from my usually steady sister. Let's take you home. This is my home, I whispered, looking around the house Brandon and I had bought together 2 years earlier, the house where we had painted the nursery while blasting 80s music and laughing when I got more paint on myself than on the walls, the house where he had carried me over the threshold even though we'd already been married a year, because he said every home deserved its own threshold moment, the house where he had held me every night and whispered lies about our future, about growing old together, about watching our children graduate and giving him grandchildren. Not anymore, Kelsey said firmly, her jaw tight, showing she was already 3 steps ahead, already planning. Not after what he just did. Tonight, we pack your things. Everything. Every photo. Every piece of clothing. Every coffee mug. He doesn't get to keep your memories either. But where would I go now? I was 8 months pregnant, waddling like a penguin, barely able to see my own feet. I had quit my job. Brandon had always insisted on handling the finances. Don't worry about the bills, love. We need you strong enough to take care of the family, he'd said, kissing my forehead, as if I were a child who needed shielding from the harsh realities of adulthood. And with a sharp, twisting pain in my gut, I realized I didn't even know how much money we had, where it was kept, how many accounts existed, or whose names were on them. That night, while Sophie and Kelsey stuffed my maternity clothes into trash bags, we didn't even have proper suitcases, just garbage bags, as if I were the trash being taken out. I finally realized how bad things really were. Hannah, Kelsey's voice was tight and hoarse from the living room, where she had set up the laptop. You need to see this, right now. She was holding our laptop, the shared one we had bought together, when Brandon first went into business for himself. Our bank statements glowed on the screen, a sea of red numbers and negative balances. Our joint checking account, the account that was supposed to be for the baby, for medical bills, for the crib we planned to buy next week, now showed a balance of $247.23. $247. That was all that was left after 3 years of building a life together. He cleaned us out, I exhaled, the air leaving my lungs like I had just been punched. He took everything, Sophie hissed, scrolling through the transactions with rapid, furious clicks. Look at this. He's been moving money out for months. Small amounts so you wouldn't notice. $50 here, $80 there, always under $100 so it wouldn't trigger any alerts. And then he pulled a huge amount this morning. While you were in the shower, while you were surrounded by people who were supposed to love you, he was at an ATM taking the last of your money. The phone on the coffee table buzzed loudly in the quiet room. A message from Brandon. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. My lawyer will contact you about the divorce. The house is in my name, so you need to be out by Friday. I will change the locks. 3 days. He was giving me 3 days to leave the life I had built, the home I had decorated, the space I had created for our child. My hands shook as I typed back, "The baby isn't yours, is that it? We both know you were seeing someone else last Christmas. Stop pretending," he replied. I stared at the message until the words blurred into dull gray shapes, until my eyes burned with tears that still refused to fall. Last Christmas, he had been obsessed with accusing me of flirting with Jake, my classmate from an online accounting course. Jake, who is gay and has been married to his husband for 10 years. Jake, whom Brandon had met multiple times, whose wedding photos he had seen. Brandon knew Jake was no threat. This was never about paternity. This was about creating a story, constructing a narrative where he was the victim and I was the villain. This was about him wanting out and needing a reason that society would accept. He is lying, I whispered to the empty room. He knows he is lying. But as I looked at the empty bank account and the boxes of my life stacked by the door, I realized the truth no longer mattered. The story had already spread through our small town like a wildfire fed by drought and wind. By morning, I would have lost my husband, lost my home, lost my family, and lost my reputation. By morning, I would be the woman, who trapped a good man with another man's child. But the real shock came an hour later, when I tried to log into the mortgage portal to prove my name was on the deed, to prove I had a legal right to this house. The password had been changed. Incorrect password. Incorrect password. The account was locked for security reasons, and when I checked the county clerk's website, public records, searchable by anyone, my heart nearly stopped. A quitclaim deed, effective 6 months earlier. February 14th, Valentine's Day. While I was cooking a romantic dinner for him, he was signing away my future. A signature that looked exactly like mine, signed to a property transfer document, handing full ownership over to Brandon Gordon alone. I stared at the signature. The looping curls on the E and the R were perfect. But I had never signed that document. If I had, I would remember giving away half a house. I did not sign it. I sank back onto the worn-out couch, cold fear coiling in my gut like a snake. This wasn't just a breakup. This wasn't just an affair, a moment of weakness, or a midlife crisis. This was theft. This was a plan. This was calculation. He had been preparing this for months, maybe longer, every piece of my life quietly breaking apart while I smiled, rubbed my belly, and talked about baby names. 1 month later, I held my daughter Ashley in the delivery room at St. Mary's Hospital. The labor, 32 hours of contractions that tore my body apart, was nothing compared to the silence of the phone on the bedside table. No calls, no messages, no husband pacing in the waiting room, no family rushing in with balloons and teddy bears. Ashley had Brandon's dark hair and his stubborn chin. She had his long fingers, the fingers of a piano player, his mother always said, and his mother's distinctive nose, the Gordon nose that Evelyn had always been so proud of. She was undeniable proof of his bloodline, living evidence of his lies, a living contradiction to the story he had created. I took pictures. So many pictures. Close-ups of her face from every angle, her tiny hands spread out on the hospital blanket, her profile looking exactly like the ultrasound photos Evelyn had said looked rather ordinary. Brandon didn't come to the hospital, neither did his family. But Sophie was there, holding my hand through every contraction. Kelsey wiped my forehead with a cool cloth, and my parents drove 12 hours through the night from Oregon to meet their granddaughter, arriving at dawn with tear-filled eyes and coffee for everyone. "She's perfect," my mother whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks as she held Ashley for the first time. "Absolutely perfect. She looks just like you did as a baby. Same little wrinkled nose." I named her Ashley Reynolds, keeping my maiden name. Brandon filed to contest paternity and remove his name from the birth certificate before she was even born. He erased us from his story, wiped us clean from the pages of his life. We moved into a tiny apartment above Mrs. Martha's bakery in the middle of town. Mrs. Martha, a widow in her 70s with a spine of steel and strong opinions about everything, took pity on me and offered me cheap rent in exchange for help with bookkeeping and occasionally working the counter. "I still remember what it feels like to start over," she told me. "My husband left me with 3 kids and a failing business. It turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me, even though I didn't know it at the time." The apartment was nothing special. 1 bedroom with walls so thin I could hear the couple next door arguing about whose turn it was to do the dishes. A tiny kitchen that always smelled like yeast and cinnamon, the scent clinging to the walls so deeply my clothes started to smell like bread. A bathroom window that didn't seal properly, letting in the chill of fall nights and the noise of the street below. But it was ours. In the months that followed, I poured everything I had into being a mother and surviving. I worked part-time for Mrs. Martha, standing on swollen feet for 6 hours at a stretch, smiling at customers who occasionally recognized me and whispered over their coffee cups. I took on freelance online accounting work while Ashley napped, squinting at spreadsheets as I sipped cold coffee and ate whatever was easiest to grab. I slowly rebuilt my life, piece by piece, dollar by dollar. But I watched, I listened, I waited. I became a student of my own destruction. studying how it had happened so I could understand how to fight back. Brandon married Natalie in a quick courthouse ceremony 2 months after Ashley was born. No grand wedding, no reception, just paperwork and a few witnesses. They moved into a larger house on the other side of town, the kind with a 3-car garage, a swimming pool, and a home theater, the kind he always told me we couldn't afford, that it didn't fit into our budget. Evelyn made sure everyone knew that Brandon had escaped a terrible situation, and that poor Natalie had kindly helped him heal his broken heart, rescuing him from the gold digger who had tried to trap him. The whole town chose sides, and money was more convincing than the truth. Money bought belief. Most chose his side. Then Sophie brought me the first bullet I needed. "You need to see this," she said on a rain-soaked Tuesday, setting her laptop on my chipped kitchen table, the one I had picked up at a yard sale. I dug into it. Natalie blocked you on everything, but she forgot about my Finsta. Rookie mistake. It was Natalie's social media, Instagram stories and Facebook posts, photos of Natalie and Brandon together, at high-end restaurants I recognized from downtown, on weekend trips to wine country, or on the beach in matching swimsuits. "Check the timestamps." Sophie pointed her neatly trimmed nail at the screen, tapping on the dates. There it was, a photo of them kissing under mistletoe, his hand tangled in her hair, her eyes closed in unmistakable happiness. Caption: "Enjoying the holidays with my love, December 24th, 11:47 p.m. "Christmas Eve," I whispered, ice flooding my blood. That same Christmas Eve, Brandon told me he had to work late at the office. That same night, he came home at 2 in the morning, reeking of perfume, and swore it was from hugging employees at a party. 11 months ago, Sophie said, her voice hard, like she was making a case. 2 months before you got pregnant. Look at the rest of it." She documented their entire affair like it was a romance novel. They didn't even bother hiding the timeline. I scrolled through each photo, my chest tightening with every one. Brandon's hand on her waist. The way he looked at her, as if she were a prize he had won. Photos from Valentine's Day, the same day he signed the waiver. Photos from my birthday, when he told me he had to work late. Photos from our anniversary weekend, when he said he had a conference. Every lie was recorded and time-stamped. "I need copies," I said, my voice flat, empty. "Everything, every photo, every post, every comment. Download it all before she deletes it." The second bullet fell into my hands by accident. I was at the grocery store with Ashley strapped to my chest, trying to buy formula, the expensive kind she could tolerate, and avoid making eye contact with people I used to call friends. I turned into the toiletries aisle and froze. Evelyn was there with her friend Helen, both of them dressed in white tennis outfits, just back from the country club. I ducked behind a shelf of paper towels, my heart pounding, Ashley making a small sound against my chest. I should have left. I should have moved to another aisle. But something compelled me to stay, made me pull out my phone and turn on the voice recorder. "Oh, the baby is definitely Brandon's," Evelyn said, her voice carrying that familiar superior tone that always reminded me of old grudges and inherited wealth. "He should meet her. I saw a photo on Facebook that Martha at the bakery posted. The baby has the Gordon nose and everything. It's undeniable. She looks just like Brandon did as a baby. Same chin, same forehead, everything exactly the same." "But Brandon said that," Helen began uncertainly. "Oh, Brandon had to get out of that marriage somehow," Evelyn cut in with a dismissive wave I could hear in her voice. "Hannah is so dull. She dragged him down with her no job, her coupons, and all her practical little habits. She drained him with her demands. Imagine wanting him to help around the house when he's a professional man. He needed a clean break. Claiming infidelity is the fastest way to protect his assets. And besides, Natalie is pregnant now, so they can finally have a real family. A legitimate one." My blood turned to ice. A legitimate one. My daughter, innocent and perfect against my chest, was a bastard in their eyes. A victim they were happy to erase. A mistake that needed to be wiped away. "But won't Hannah sue?" Helen asked. "Sue for what?" Evelyn laughed. "She's dirt poor, living above a bakery like some Victorian street urchin. She's too proud to demand a paternity test. She knows it would only drag her name through the mud even more. And we would fight it. Brandon's name isn't on the birth certificate. Legally, he has no obligations at all. It's really quite perfect. I stopped the recording. My hands were shaking with a fury so intense that it felt like everything suddenly snapped into focus, like the world had become sharp for the first time in months. I understood it now. Admission of paternity, admission of fraud, admission of perjury. That night, I called my lawyer, Rachel Watson. She was a fierce young woman fresh out of law school who had taken my case pro bono because she hated bullies, and my ex-husband was the worst bully she had ever seen on paper. Evelyn just gave us everything, I told her, as I played the audio file through the speaker, my voice calm for the first time in months. "This is huge," Rachel said, her voice shaking with excitement. "This is exactly what we need. We can file for paternity establishment and child support immediately. This proves bad faith. It proves fraud. It proves he lied to the court. Hannah, this changes everything." "I want more than child support," I said, looking at Ashley sleeping in the old crib I had bought secondhand and washed 3 times. "I want the house back. I want the money he stole. I want the fraud charges to stick. And Rachel, I want them to hurt the way they hurt me." "What are you thinking?" "I think it's time for a paternity test," I said, feeling something cold and resolute rise in my chest. "A very public one." But before we could even file, Sophie burst into my apartment the next morning, waving a thick cream-colored envelope like a battle flag. "You're not going to believe the nerve of this," she said, panting from running up the stairs. "Look at this! Look at this!" I opened the envelope. Gold-embossed lettering, professional calligraphy, heavy cardstock that probably cost $5 per invitation. "A prince is on the way. Please join us to celebrate Natalie and Brandon's baby shower on Saturday, November 12th at 2 p.m. Sterling Heights Country Club. Formal attire requested." It was at the country club, the very place I had once dreamed of but been denied. "Too expensive," Brandon had said. "We need to be realistic." "I have an idea," I said to Sophie, a cold smile touching my lips for the first time in months. "But I'll need your help to get inside." "Oh, honey," Sophie grinned, her eyes lighting up with the kind of mischief that had gotten us into trouble since middle school. "I was invited. They think I'm neutral, that I'm still friends with both of you. Let's burn it down." The plan took 2 months to execute flawlessly, every detail mapped like a military campaign. Rachel quietly filed the petition to establish paternity, timing it so the subpoena for the DNA test would arrive right before the party. But Brandon managed to dodge the process server for 2 weeks. Apparently, he'd been tipped off by someone, maybe Evelyn or one of his lawyer friends. That was fine. This was all still within my control. The judge was not pleased with his evasion, and that would only help us later. I used those weeks to make sure the house underwent a full forensic audit. Rachel hired an expert, a woman named Dr. Patricia Morales, who had testified in hundreds of fraud cases. She found everything: the money transfers, the forged signatures, the quitclaim deed with the suspicious notary seal. "This notary?" Morales said, pointing at the stamp. "She lost her license 3 years ago for falsifying documents. She had no legal authority to notarize anything. This document is worthless." It was a felony, multiple felonies. Fraud, forgery, possibly embezzlement if we could prove intent. Brandon had been careless in his secrecy, convinced I was too broken to fight back. The court ordered paternity test results from the cheek swab, which Brandon had finally complied with out of fear of being found in contempt and possibly arrested, came back one day before Natalie's party. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. I held the paper in my hands as I sat in my beat-up old Honda sedan in the country club parking lot, watching luxury cars line up to enter. Ashley sat on my lap, dressed in the prettiest white dress I could afford. I had spent 3 hours digging through thrift stores to find it. her jet black hair braided into two tiny pigtails with satin ribbons. She looked like an angel, a tiny avenging angel sent down to carry out justice. Sophie texted me. "They're opening gifts. Room is packed. Showtime." I took a deep breath, feeling my heart pound in my throat. "Ready, baby?" I whispered to Ashley, kissing her forehead. "Time to meet your father." I walked into the country club as if I owned the land it stood on, as if I belonged there more than anyone else in the room. The double doors flew open, and the chatter cut off instantly, like someone had hit the mute button on reality. The room was opulent. Ice sculptures shaped like a carriage, a string quartet playing soft classical music in the corner, a dessert table that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent. Natalie sat on a throne-like armchair, surrounded by designer-wrapped gifts, glowing in pink silk, one hand protectively on her pregnant belly. Brandon stood beside her in his tailored suit, champagne flute in hand, looking like a lord surveying his domain. Evelyn sat near the dessert table, laughing with women I recognized from the society pages. When they saw me, silence fell completely. It was heavy, thick, suffocating, like the air before a thunderstorm. Brandon went pale as old paper, the blood draining from his face. Natalie's mouth fell open, her hands clutched to her stomach. Evelyn's laughter died mid-note, her face freezing stiff. "What is she doing here?" Evelyn hissed, her voice slicing through the stillness like a blade, shrill with panic. "Security! Somebody call security right now!" "I don't think they'll want to throw me out," I said calmly, my voice carrying to the back of the room, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Not when I have such wonderful news to share with all of you." I walked straight toward Brandon, my heels clicking against the marble floor. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, eyes wide, phones already lifted and recording. I could see the confusion, the recognition, and the dawning horror as people realized who I was. "Brandon," I said sweetly, shifting Ashley on my hip so everyone could see her face, see the undeniable resemblance Evelyn had already admitted to. "I wanted you to be the first to know. The court results are in." He couldn't speak. He just stared at me, then at Ashley, then back at me. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an exit that didn't exist, searching for someone who could save him. 99.97%, I announced, holding up the document for the whole room to see. "Congratulations, Brandon. It's a girl. You have a daughter now. And under California law, you owe 9 months of back child support plus medical expenses, but we'll discuss that later." The room exploded. Gasps. Whispers turning into conversations. Chairs scraping. Someone dropped a glass. "That's impossible," Natalie stammered, struggling to stand, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. He said you cheated. He said it wasn't his fault. He swore on his mother's life." "He lied, and so did you," I cut in flatly, turning to face her, meeting her eyes directly for the first time in 9 months. "Just like he lied about wanting to work on our marriage. Just like he lied about where he was on Christmas night." "Sophie!" I called. Sophie stepped forward, connecting her phone to the Bluetooth speaker system she had hacked earlier, smiling at the technician who thought she was just testing the setup. "Christmas night," Sophie announced to the entire room, her voice clear and strong. While Hannah was at home cooking Christmas dinner, preparing the meal Brandon had specifically requested, Brandon was busy with other things. The large projection screen behind Natalie, meant to display her pregnancy journey, suddenly filled with screenshot after screenshot, larger than life. Brandon and Natalie kissing, multiple shots from multiple angles, timestamps, boastful captions about their secret love, and stolen moments. "But that's not all," I said, turning to Evelyn, who was now completely frozen in place. "You knew, didn't you, Evelyn? You told Helen Murphy that Ashley looks exactly like your son. You knew Ashley is his child?" I nodded to Sophie. She pressed play on the recording. Evelyn's voice rang out over the speakers, sharp and unmistakably clear, her familiar tone impossible to deny. "Oh, that baby is definitely Brandon's. He should meet her. She has the Gordon nose and everything. It's undeniable. Brandon had to get out of that marriage somehow. Hannah is so dull. Saying infidelity is the fastest way to protect his assets. She's too proud to demand a paternity test. Evelyn collapsed back into her chair, her face drained of color, both hands gripping the armrests. The socialites around her recoiled as if she were contagious, as if her moral failure might spread through proximity. "You knew!" someone whispered loudly. Mrs. Ramirez from the Historical Society. "You let him abandon his own child? You helped him lie?" "Brandon," I said, pulling his attention back to me, savoring the tremor in his hands, the beads of sweat on his forehead. "Do you want to meet Ashley? She's 9 months old. She has your eyes, your hair, your stubborn chin. She's learning to walk. Sometimes she says, 'Daddy,' even though she's never met you." He looked at Ashley. For 1 second, I saw something like regret. Or maybe only fear. Maybe the slow realization of what he had done, what he had lost, what he had destroyed. Ashley reached out her chubby hand toward him, babbling happily, unaware of the tension filling the room. She looked exactly like him. The resemblance was undeniable, blazing in front of everyone's eyes. He began, his voice breaking. "I don't. This." "She's only 9 months old," I went on, my voice rising as the rage finally broke through. "And she has never been held by her father. Never heard your voice except in old videos I've had to play so she would know what you look like. You abandoned us. You cheated to steal our house. Yes, we found the forged documents, Brandon. The police are very interested in real estate fraud." "The police?" Natalie shrieked, staring at Brandon in betrayal, one hand flying to her belly. "What is she talking about? You said the house was yours. You said she signed it over." "He stole my house," I said to him, ignoring her, my voice cold as ice. "You forged my signature on the property transfer. You stole our savings, every cent I scraped together over 3 years, and even before I ever met you. You destroyed my reputation. You turned me into a liar and a con artist. And you did all of it while sleeping with my cousin and planning your new life." I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every woman who had shunned me, who had crossed the street to avoid me, who had whispered behind my back. "For 9 months, all of you treated me like an outcast. You believed I was the villain. You believed his lies because he had more money than I did, and I lived above a bakery. Because it was easier to believe I was the problem than to believe that someone you knew, someone you trusted, could be this cruel. But look at him now. Look at her." I pointed to Ashley, who was making happy little sounds, completely unaware of everything. "Does she look like a lie to you?" "Hannah?" Mrs. Ramirez stepped forward, tears in her eyes, her hands clasped tightly. We didn't know. I'm so sorry. I should have asked. I should have believed you." "You didn't ask," I said calmly, not unkindly. "None of you did." I turned back to Brandon. "This Tuesday you'll be in court for child support. We're seeking everything. The house you obtained through fraud, the savings you stole, emotional damages. And Brandon, don't be late this time. The judge already doesn't like you." I turned on my heel, back straight, head held high. As I walked toward the exit, Natalie started screaming in Brandon's face, both hands slamming into his chest, her voice shrill and frantic. "You lied! You lied to me! You said she was crazy! You said the baby wasn't yours!" Evelyn sobbed into her napkin, her carefully composed appearance crumbling. The perfect life they had built on my back was collapsing into dust, and I watched it happen. I pushed the door open and stepped outside into the pale morning light, breathing in the clean air, faintly scented with freedom. I did not look back. I buckled Ashley into her car seat. She smiled at me, drool running down her chin, happy and safe. "We did it, sweetheart," I whispered. "We won." The morning of the final divorce hearing arrived wrapped in thin fog and gray drizzle, perfectly matching the strange, suspended feeling of officially ending a marriage that had been dead for a long time. I dressed carefully in a new business dress, one Brandon had never seen. Sharper eyeliner, bolder lipstick, every line of my face made up not to look gentle, but to look unbreakable. My parents watched Ashley for me. She stayed home with Grandma. clutching the balding teddy bear Sophie had given her, while I walked into family court with steadier steps than I had ever taken before. Rachel waited for me in the courthouse lobby, her expression professional and calm as always. But her hand squeezed my shoulder briefly, like setting the final lock on the composure I was trying to hold together. The small courtroom smelled of old paper, recycled air, and cheap coffee, the window looking out over the city where I had started again from nothing, with a baby in my arms. Brandon was already seated when we walked in, and the sight of him made me falter half a step. The man who once moved through the city in pressed shirts, polished shoes, and the confidence of a provider, now wore a wrinkled, cheap button-down with a slightly frayed collar. He had lost weight. Dark circles sat under his eyes. The hair that had once been neatly trimmed now grew uneven, streaked with a few strands of gray. The brand-new SUV he once bragged about had been repossessed by the bank. According to Rachel's investigator, he was living in a dingy studio near the highway, where the sound of passing trucks never stopped. Beside him sat the third lawyer he had hired. The first quit after reading the file. The second backed out after realizing Brandon wasn't an innocent man. This one looked fresh out of school, tie crooked, spinning his pen nervously, his eyes clearly overwhelmed by the thick stack of documents Rachel laid out and the silent but heavy presence of Dr. Morales, seated behind us. "The terms remain as agreed," Rachel said evenly, placing the final settlement folder on the table before the judge, then turning a copy toward Brandon. "Ms. Hannah Morrison retains full ownership of the Elm Street house, all savings accounts, retirement funds, and any jointly held investments. Mr. Brandon Gordon is obligated to pay $4,000 per month in child support, plus a one-time payment of $150,000 for the initial contribution, and $500,000 in emotional damages as ordered by the court. No spousal support, no future claims on assets." Brandon's pen trembled in his hand, the tip tapping faintly against the paper. His signature now looked like the unsteady scrawl of a child learning to write. Nothing like the sharp, triumphant signature he had once used on the papers that stole my future. The judge reread the custody terms. Ashley would remain with me full-time, all visitation to be reviewed later based on whether Brandon actually complied with his financial obligations. A no-contact provision in cases of psychological harm, Rachel added softly, referencing the threats, the false statements he had spread to save his reputation. Brandon did not look at me. He stared at the wooden tabletop, where every illusion of saving his assets had long since died. The image of the poor man betrayed by his wife, that he had sold to the town, had evaporated the moment the DNA results and Evelyn's recording echoed through the country club that day. Natalie had left him 3 months earlier. The moment the money ran dry and social standing shifted away from them, she disappeared like smoke. She moved back in with her parents, raising her son alone, barred from the country clubs that once welcomed her. Karma, it seemed, came with both irony and precision. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, so soft I nearly didn't hear it. "I know you won't believe me, but I'm sorry." I turned to look at him, really look at him for the first time in many months. Not the man who once kissed my forehead when I brought him breakfast in bed. Not the man who once rested his hand on my pregnant belly and talked about baby names. But the hollow shell left after the lies, the schemes, and the cowardice had been stripped away. "You're right," I replied calmly. "I don't believe you." Not because he didn't know how to apologize, but because his apology came too late, after he had stood by while others called his daughter a child who didn't belong to their family, and stayed silent. He signed the final page, set the pen down like placing a period at the end of the version of himself he had tried to sell to the entire town. The pitiful husband, the innocent father. Without another word, he stood, shoulders slumped, and walked out of the courtroom. His footsteps echoed down the long hallway, sounding like a funeral march for the man he had pretended to be for years. Outside, the rain was still falling lightly. I stood beneath the awning and took a deep breath. feeling strangely lighter, not because the sadness was gone, but because the weight of waiting for justice had finally lifted from my shoulders. 1 week later, when Evelyn knocked on the door of my old apartment, her eyes sunken, her wrinkled hands trembling as she begged to see Ashley, just for a few minutes. I looked at Ashley, who had stopped running to stare at the stranger at the entrance, completely forgetting the butterfly. She deserved to know her family, even the broken pieces, even the pieces that had hurt us. "You can leave them on the porch," I finally said. Can I say hello to her for a moment? Just for a little while, please?" I hesitated, feeling the weight of the decision. I held all the power now. I could crush her, the way she had tried to crush me. I could banish her forever, cut her out completely, leave her to die in loneliness and bitterness. That would be justified. That would be deserved. But I looked at my daughter, filled with light, innocence, and unconditional love. I didn't want to teach her cruelty. I didn't want her to learn that winning meant grinding your enemies into dust. I wanted to teach her strength, yes, but also mercy. I wanted her to be better than the people who had hurt us. 5 minutes, I said. "And Evelyn? If you say a single negative word about me or my family in front of her, if you try to poison her against me, you will never see her again. Never. Do you understand?" She limped up the steps and sat down on the porch swing, her trembling hand holding out a teddy bear to Ashley. Ashley moved closer cautiously, looking at me for reassurance. I nodded, and she took the bear, studying it with great seriousness. "It's pretty," Ashley said, hugging it. "You're so beautiful," Evelyn whispered. "You're so beautiful, just like your mother." I watched my daughter, bathed in the bright golden sunlight, giggling as Evelyn gently pushed the swing. I lost my husband, but I found myself. I was burned to ashes, and from those ashes, I built a fortress, a home, a life worth living. Brandon walked out of that baby shower thinking he had ended my life, that he was free to start over with someone younger, prettier, and less demanding. But instead, he gave me the greatest gift of all, the chance to see exactly how strong I could be. The chance to prove that I was not just his wife, not just his victim, not just the story he told about me. Ashley looked up at me from the lawn, her eyes shining with love. "Mommy, look!" She spun clumsily, her little arms stretched wide. "I'm looking at you, my love," I answered, my heart overflowing. "I'm always watching you. I'm always here." And as the sun set over my home, my real home, fully paid for and peaceful, I knew that the best revenge was not money, or humiliation, or lawsuits, or even the criminal charges that would haunt Brandon for years. It was simply being happy without him. It was building a life so full of love, joy, and purpose that his absence no longer meant anything at all. We were whole. We were strong. We were extraordinary. And we did it ourselves, one day at a time, one small victory after another, until the fortress stood solid and unbreakable.